Hello, everyone. This is Shiv again, and today with this panel, we have three new panelists. We have Sunny from Black Sheep Foods. We got Phäedra from Spero, and then we also have a third panelist who's connecting right now, and he'll be here shortly, is Dan from Karana. So they're each the founders or CEOs of their respective firms, and we just wanted to talk about alternative protein. So I guess for the three of you, or at least for now, Sunny and Phäedra, could you maybe open up with uh, maybe a quick introduction about your firms, and then we'll go into maybe how and why is your company different in the alternative protein space, and from each of you, and maybe against like the broader competition.
Do you want to start?
Oh yeah, either of you can start.
Okay. Hi, I'm Phäedra, the founder and CEO of Spero Foods. At Spero, we make dairy from seeds, not nuts. And I created Spero because I wanted every single person to be able to eat clean dairy alternatives that actually taste good. So really leveraged my background in engineering and chemistry and actually even in art to develop Spero's patent pending formulations and brand aesthetic. And I'll go a bit more into why we use seeds and how we're different after I hear from some of my colleagues.
Cool. I'm Sunny Kumar, co-founder and CEO of Black Sheep Foods. We make the best tasting plant-based alternatives, starting with lamb. And I'll also go into what sort of differentiates us from the current crop of alternatives out there when we go into the competitive advantage portion of the Q&A.
Sounds good. I guess with that, I think a good question to kind of go into is in terms of the alternative protein, right? Everything is it's changing the way we eat and changing the way we view food. So maybe how has like the traditional protein supply or traditional firms and that are protein suppliers or brands responded to shifting demands of consumers, and also the fact that you've come into the industry and maybe taken away their loyal customers? Either if you could start. I think it's open to both of you.
Do you want to go first?
Yes. So just to sort of reiterate the question, what are current crop of companies doing as they face this threat from plant-based companies, and how are we sort of viewing the landscape? Is that the correct sort of
for the first part? Yeah, I would say that's pretty much correct. Yeah.
Cool, and I think this dovetails kind of nicely with our competitive advantage, so I'll take the lead on this one. I think the current crop of companies, what they're essentially doing is it's a very much of a copycat variety, and or they have to protect their existing interests, and so they're sort of doing half measures. What do I mean by that? So the first thing is like either they'll come out with plant-based alternatives that very much mimic the Impossible or Beyonds because they see them being popular. I'm sure they have board meetings where they kind of like, hey, you got to mimic exactly what's going on. And or what's happening is they're in shareholders got up our meat business, so let's make these hybrid plant protein products that actually don't really cater to any real group, right? Because vegans and vegetarians or flexitarians don't really want to eat these sort of half measures. And then on the opposite end, real meat eaters don't want to eat like half plants. So you have like this weird hybrid that really suits no one. I think from our perspective, and this kind of goes into our competitive advantage, what we looked at is why are the meats that we currently eat consumed? And if you look at the current cow, I'm talking about actual animal-based meats, current cow, swine, chickens, they're not bred for taste. They're bred for efficiency of growth, speed at which they could like procreate, the viability of their young, metrics that a sociopath would look for in case they were trying to consume an animal, not like a person who was focused on taste. And for us at Black Sheep Foods, what we, after sort of understanding the market, what we realized was there's a huge sort of white space for really amazing tasting plant-based alternatives. And so we're starting off with like this heritage lamb species that your grandfather probably ate, or, you know, is sort of like you could taste the earth that it's coming from. So for us, that's been really exciting. And we're going to fast follow with like a duck species that you've never experienced before. So right now, most of duck consumed in the world is Peking, which is, again, domesticated to suit the needs of a supply chain. We're going to go with a wild breed of duck that's going to like blow your mind. So for us, it's all about taste and how do we sort of 10x the experience on taste. And I think what a lot of traditional companies are doing now is they're saying we're in copycat mode. This apparently works. Let's sort of like go back. And I think that's where the innovation from smaller startups really comes from, thinking differently.
Sounds good. And I guess before we jump right into Phäedra's response, this is Dan. Dan is the representative for Karana. And I guess when we get to you, Dan, we'll talk. You can introduce your company real quick. That's all we've really talked about at this point. And the current question that we had posed was about how traditional protein suppliers or brands have responded to like shifting demands, and especially with all these new alternative proteins, like have they changed anything, or essentially how they responded. So with that, we can go right on to Phäedra and Spero.
Yeah, so I think it was really interesting to hear your perspective, and definitely similar trends in the dairy sector. So you do see with the onset and prevalence of consumers being interested in dairy-free options, more and more companies jumping into this space. However, one of the biggest problems is that everyone is using the same techniques and the same ingredient base since really the onset of the development of this sector. So predominantly people are employing ingredients like cashews, almonds, coconuts, a very price prohibitive, expensive, difficult to scale category. And no one really looked at doing something different with lower cost ingredients. So that's really where we come in. We know people want plant-based dairy, but today one of the biggest inhibitors is the price. And if we continue to use nuts, we will not be able to, one, meet demand, and two, be able to meet price and compete with commodity-based dairy. So what we've done is really looked at, how is everyone else thinking about this sector, and then how do we think about it differently from first principles. So innovating in a different way, because we're using a more challenging ingredient set. We use seeds, definitely more challenging in flavor and texture and color. So you really have to apply novel techniques in order to make this a viable ingredient category. And so that's where we came in. And, a little bit more about why seeds, which answers one of your other questions that was related, is like almonds and cashews will never create cost comparable products, as I said, because they take so much time, space, water, and human labor. So for example, seeds are 8 times less expensive than cashews and almonds. They grow up to 70 times faster. They use up to 30 times less land and up to 25 times less water. It can take, for a tub of almond cream cheese, over 200 gallons of just tap water. To grow a new cashew tree could take 8 years. In contrast to sunflower seed would take about 8 gallons of water for a sunflower cream cheese, and new crops would grow in about 45 days. So you have these dramatic differences in the agricultural process that will allow you to create much, more rapidly evolving products.
Okay, thanks. And Dan, if you could maybe first, I guess, introduce Karana and what exactly you guys do and how you guys are really different from obviously our other two panelists here and like the other companies that you're competing with, and then jump into the same question that we had the other two field.
Sure. So yeah, sorry for the technical difficulties, and thanks for having me. At Karana, we're basically making meat from whole plant ingredients. So that's our main differentiator, is we look at things that we can use in their, full plant form. But we also look for ingredients that tell a really good story around their sustainability, their environmental impact, who's growing them. So we work a lot with smallholder farmers. So we're very focused on jackfruit as the first crop we're working with, because I'm sure a lot of people have experienced jackfruit. It has a very interesting fibrous meat-like texture naturally. It hasn't been commercialized in particularly interesting ways so far. It does a lot in terms of biodiversity. It has a fantastic environmental impact story. It gives us a chance to engage with a really sustainable form of agriculture and show that it can be scaled. So we then take that and turn it into very convenience-focused products. So we're targeting very much Asian flavors and Asian profiles. We're based in Singapore. So we're looking at a line of dumplings, baos, and dim sum products as our first main product range. And then in terms of how, I believe the question was how the industry is reacting to the current situation or to sort of the changing face of food. I mean, I think, you know, the current situation is definitely changing things even more quickly than was already happening. I think, you know, it will accelerate what has already been an awakening in sort of how our food is produced, the issues with it, issues from an environmental standpoint, from a health standpoint. And I think, you know, you have some companies that recognize that and have been recognizing that and are very willing to engage even with very early stage startups like us, and be very collaborative. And then you have some that are taking a more protectionist, you know, hard-headed approach. And I think it's going to be very difficult to fight against this trend in the long term. So I think companies are realizing, the smart companies are realizing that. And so we're seeing pretty, you know, positive engagement so far.
It's good. Interesting to hear too. So we do have a question from the audience. So the question is to the three of you. It's saying, how different is the process of replicating taste to a wider range of animal protein? And therefore, how can we defend your advantage versus other competitors?
I think that might be more focused on black sheep, but
yeah,
sorry, go ahead.
A little bit, yeah.
No, go ahead, Sunny, start.
It's quite difficult. So just to give an anecdote, we got flavors from a leading flavor house. Flavor houses are people you interact with 15 to 20 times a day, and you probably don't even realize it. They're the reason why your Minute Maid tastes the same. They're the reason why natural gas smells the way it does, perfumes, deodorants, et cetera, et cetera. So they're pretty big players in the industry, and you sort of, they're the silent players where you don't realize how much you interact with them, but you do. And so we compared our flavors to a couple of leading flavor houses, and we were able to sort of far outperform them. And this is with taste tests, not with internally, but with other people. And when we sort of shared a particular component or two, just to try to see if we could like use them for supply chain purposes and for sourcing, what we found is they were sort of totally caught off guard, and they were like, why would you need this? Where is this coming from? Things of that nature. And what we then realized is flavor houses aren't really doing frontier research. What they're essentially doing is, let's say, if I was Minute Maid or Tropicana, I would go to them and say, look, I want to recreate the same flavor in every piece of orange juice. And here's a profile. Can you sort of mass scale this for me? They're almost like a Foxconn. They're contract manufacturing organizations that provide a little bit of R&D to get you to a certain place. And then their true value comes in, you know, scaling up that one flavor, providing like high degrees of safety, high degrees of service level, so they're always available, always there. And the frontier research is really sort of done by the companies themselves that are bringing these new products to market. And what we view as, again, like this place where there's no real activity happening is for the cell and plant-based future. People are going to want these novel flavors, and we're sort of doing that primary research. And just to give another example, you know, when you do a biopsy on an animal and you get sort of all the compounds that are present in it, these are in the thousands. And so from the thousands to figure out like, hey, which 5, 6, 7, or 8 matter. We had to brute force our first one, but then we took those learnings and we're putting them into an algorithm because, you know, that's the perfect place for big data. Like, hey, we have a bunch of compounds, which ones are actually important? And, you know, we're still gonna have to brute force the next couple of them, but as you sort of put more and more training data essentially into the system, you're able to, for the 5th one or 6th one or 7th one, you're able to quickly sort of say, look, you know, the fog of war is 4,000 compounds. Well, let's narrow it down to maybe 100. And so your speed at which you could come up with one-to-one proxies of like these moose, which is supposed to be a better beef, or venison, which there's like 10 different types only in like Texas alone, just increases, and it gives us that sort of data competitive advantage. And that's where the real sort of competitive advantage for us comes.
Cool. I would just throw in from my perspective, I mean, we're based in Asia, and in Asia, you know, meat has historically had a different role, either due to scarcity or cost or any number of factors. So it's less of a center of plate, fixture, and more integrated, along with a lot of spices, generally stretched as far as possible with vegetables, with fillers, with things. So it's not sort of a fully new concept to be more plant forward, or you have a lot of room to work with in terms of finished dishes. So that's one of the reasons we focus on kind of these finished iconic dishes, dumplings, baos, things that people recognize, they see as a whole dish or a whole product, rather than a very specific cut of meat or type of distinct meat flavor. So that gives us a little bit more room to work with and get feedback at this sort of stage of our product development.
For sure. Okay, yeah, thanks to both of you. So go into another one. I think Dan kind of touched on it, and I'm sure it's at the forefront of your mind. So how has really this COVID and the pandemic, I mean, it's been global, but obviously the US is seeing a ton of it, really disrupted your firm, and has it maybe accelerated the thought process, the alternative protein support, like Dan was kind of mentioning, or alternative dairy, has it required you to adjust your markets or your targeted segments or your supply channels? Like what has it done to your business in terms of disruption or maybe even support?
Yeah, I mean, I think I can start with that. We're, selling in the retail channel, and what we've seen is more and more consumers obviously shift to online, so more e-commerce platforms. So a huge opportunity for growth is partnering with companies like that. Meal delivery kits are soaring, grocery delivery soaring. So really just opening up new channels. I mean, people are still eating groceries, and CPGs higher than ever. One other interesting thing in the retail business that's happened is the stress and shortage of buyers' time. So these are the people who deal with like restocking products and ensuring constant supply. And they've been very preoccupied with making sure, quote unquote, essentials are in stock. So toilet paper, canned food, frozen goods, and then they've neglected a lot of other things. So we've definitely had to really provide extra support to these people who are really stressed, and ensure that we're helping them and serving them. So that's been a big shift for us. So it's one, new channels have opened up, and two, a different way of supporting our stores than we had to before, because they have shifting needs and constraints in their daily roles.
Yeah, I mean, for us, we're still quite early, so we were gearing up for a very food service focused launch in Singapore. So obviously, we're having to rethink that. We're pushing forward a lot of products that were going to come a bit further down the line, based on that initial food service launch. So our ready to cook products, and also looking more at how we can provide better and easier food service solutions, because restaurants models are changing as well very quickly. But also looking at accelerating our move to retail.
Yeah, I agree with the other two panelists. I think I'll take maybe a different angle. I think even with all this crisis and essentially the world economy just coming to a halt, carbon emissions are only expected to decline by like 5.5%. And so, we're four people, we're all mission driven. I think everyone on this panel / people listening are mission driven. And for us, only 5.5%. I mean, the whole world economy has come to an end, and you're sort of seeing such a small
we lost
gauge like that really sort of fuel the fire again. Oh, hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, we got you back.
No. Okay, cool. Yeah, for us, like, it kind of really made us to care about our mission again, because you kind of forget it when you're doing operational stuff. So we're just kind of like, hey, getting rid of that emissions from the meat and agriculture sector is really important, and so let's sort of get remotivated essentially. And so that was our big learning from the COVID crisis, that we're on the right path and we're doing something that we care about. Let's just sort of go full bore as soon as we're things open up a little bit.
Okay, yeah, interesting tidbit on the environmental impact. So we got a couple questions from the audience, so I'm going to pick the one with the most upvotes. So it's saying, we're going to shift a little bit. How do you decide which of these thousands of compounds found in meat have a significant but unknown nutritional impact rather than just focusing on flavor. So I think this doesn't just have to be meat. I think it can apply to all three of you, though. Do you need me to repeat the question, or?
Yeah, maybe. What was the compounds on?
Yeah, so how do you decide which of these thousands of compounds found in meat have a significant but unknown nutritional impact rather than just focusing on flavor?
I'm not sure I fully understand the question, but I'll sort of answer what I think maybe in our context. I mean, so one thing that comes up with us a lot is, our products are more on the natural side. That, like I said, we focus on whole plant rather than looking at one specific nutritional attribute. So, we see that consumers across multiple markets, especially Asia, but in the West as well, are looking for transparency and nutrition primarily in all of these products, and it's lacking in a lot of them. So, we very much look at offering something that is very easy to understand and has a very holistic nutritional profile rather than getting too deep into any one particular functional quality, because, our idea of what is good for us, what is healthy, what is sort of the new thing we should be eating changes constantly. We're bombarded by information, both correct and incorrect, or outdated around this. So, I mean, we want to offer kind of a simple but healthy and better for you solution to customers.
Okay.
Yeah, from our perspective, that's a good question. So, let's say if you have 4,000 compounds and we're only focusing on taste, there's other ways first of all, like taste is by far, if you look at the surveys, the number one determinant of whether people like your product or not. Like they'll say it's the environment, they'll say it's sustainability and animal welfare, all these moral reasons. But if you don't win on taste, no one's going to eat your product. So for us, it's always been, how do we get the taste to be perfect? And then essentially what you're asking is, how do we bridge the gap between that and the nutrition that's found in a lamb or a beef or a pork or a duck? And essentially what you could do is you could use plant-based alternatives to, again, narrow that gap. So for us, nutritional yeast is a sort of a godsend. It has the B12 that animal products traditionally have. It has a lot of the other compounds that we as humans need, and sometimes over-index on, such as protein and all these other things that we sort of think and hold as gospel as, hey, we need like 1 gram of protein for every pound of body mass that we have. So there's other sort of compounds that we could put inside, nutritional yeast being one of them. You could add oxidants and such to help with other vitamins. And so there's other ways of augmenting your end product that could provide that nutritional value that people yearn for. But for us, the flavor, we haven't done research. Flavor is always king, and so that's our number one focus. And again, we're in day 1, day 3, day 4, day 5. As this space gets larger and more sort of mainstream, we'll find other ways to identify which compounds provide some sort of nutritional value. But for now, we're laser focused on one thing, which is the taste aspect of things.
Okay. Thanks. So I can move on to the next question. So the next one from the audience that came in first was, since these plant or seed-based dairies typically use non-commodity inputs, do they complement other emerging ag tech sectors such as indoor farming? So I think that's towards Phäedra a little bit.
So just so I understand the question is if our ingredient base complements something like indoor farming.
Yeah. So like what kind of businesses do they think are benefiting from your existence in the industry, I think is what I'm getting from it.
Well, I think generally how we look at it is what is the impact of our raw ingredients. I think the planet overall benefits from the existence of the growth of a seed-based dairy over a nut-based dairy, because we're using tremendously less water, less land. You have much fairer labor practices. You have fewer CO2 emissions than a nut-based product as well. So I'd really look at it holistically from that perspective. Sunflower seeds are also very regenerative for the soil. So overall, the way it impacts the planet is very significant.
Okay. So we're going to shift to another one. So the next question, can sustainability of protein be revolutionized for emerging markets such as India, Indonesia, South Asia, Africa? And will there be any investment in alternative sources of protein?
I'm happy to start with that because we're pretty close. I mean, I was at a GFI conference in India last November, and I was very impressed by sort of what I saw was happening. But India has been leading plant-based for a long time. I mean, they have a wide abundance of cheap protein sources. So, you know, but you still see successful new companies like Good Dot and several other really cool brands launching in India. There's a really cool new dairy brand there, or alternative dairy brand. So you have huge potential in emerging markets like that. India is a bit unique because they have a long-standing sort of vegetarian and plant-centric culture. But in other countries, Indonesia, Vietnam, there's definitely potential. And there's a lot of local ingredients. I mean, like one of the things we look at doing is find ingredients that can be regionalized and localized, and where we can improve, you know, supply chains that are already existing and that where there is already bioavailability of raw materials, rather than the need to plant, you know, lots of new soy or pea capacity. So I think it's about finding the right crops and ingredients that work in those markets and can have efficient supply chains. It's about, you know, adapting to local tastes, but you also have huge growth in a lot of these markets, huge growth in wealth and education and awareness around nutrition and things. There's the opposite effect as well. A lot of these countries, along with that wealth, are now eating in more Western, less environmentally or health friendly ways. So I think there's absolutely just a need for more localized, a wider variety of products and solutions that are geared towards all these individual countries.
Okay, great. So I think a lot of big discussions are around the challenges that you're really seeing. So I think an important question that a lot of people want to hear about is, what markets do you think have the most potential for growth in the space outside of the US? And then what kind of challenges have you faced within the US and with just generally growing?
I could talk a little bit about that. So I think the markets that are experiencing what economists like to call the demographic dividend. So a majority of your population is young. So India is a perfect example of this. They're sort of where China was circa early 90s. And traditionally, when you have a young population, you have more labor force and you experience sort of economic gain. And with economic gain comes increased protein consumption. But I think what's essentially happening now is you have the younger population is, you know, more attuned to trying alternatives. So in countries where you have a young population, B, sort of increasing protein levels, and like people you want to target for alternatives, and that's happening in India, that's happening in MENA, Middle East, North Africa, and so for us, like targeting those populations is great. And then you know, to start off with, the developed world is always awesome, just because the supply chains are great here. You have cold supply chains, co-packers exist, and the rule of law is a little bit more sort of, you know, you could bank on a little bit more. And so for us, starting off and like developing the brand and seeing sell through, making product formulations that are better, and then sort of moving on to places where, again, younger population experiencing that growth in protein is a perfect sort of next phase 2 expansion.
Okay. I think what works well with that question is what will it take to achieve a significant shift in the consumer assumption to plant-based protein? So we talked about how in the developing world that is a shift that's probably going to take a little longer, and like when do you see this happening, right? So is COVID really accelerating that, which I think it is, and if we're talking about accelerating, are we talking accelerating in the next year where it becomes a lot bigger, or is it like a 10-year plan? Like, where do you guys see that?
I mean, it's definitely going to take a significant amount of time, but in terms of the acceleration, I think it's a very salient point, especially given, as we've seen in the U.S., the instability of, for example, the meat and dairy production methods and chain of operations. You've seen a lot of companies have to shut down, have difficulty staying afloat. Whereas if you look at like the production of a plant-based or dairy or plant-based dairy or meat product, typically requires less labor and enables more automation throughout the entire production process. So people are starting to recognize that this whole different sector is more stable. So in times of economic downturn, in times of pandemics, which there will be more in the future, if we were relying more and more on plant-based options, we wouldn't have such existential, moments of scarcity of our food supply. So I think the impetus is really strong, but just given the nature of manufacturing methods not being equivalent today in size and automation to the animal base, it's going to take a decent amount of time to get there. But I think it's really on the forefront of people's minds now.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I think you'll start to see a lot of movement very quickly. I mean, there's been a lot of news out of China in the last couple of weeks. A lot of brands launching there, both local and international brands. I think you'll start to see similar things across other markets. Some will move faster than others, but even in more mature markets, and say like the US is a relatively more mature market in terms of plant-based product offerings and infrastructure, we're still nowhere near the level of scale, which I've heard mentioned on several panels today. We need more product options. We need a bigger variety of better products. They need to be cheaper. And all of this goes even more significantly in emerging markets and developing economies because price points are extremely important. You need to have a certain level of scale. You need to have motivated local entrepreneurs who see the economic opportunities in doing this. I mean, you still have most young Indonesians who have a bit of extra capital are desperate to start a poultry operation because it's relatively low cost and high return. They're not thinking about creating plant-based chicken yet at this. So, we ways to go before we're really shifting the mindsets. But in terms of initial interest, people caring about what they eat, what goes into their bodies, that's absolutely accelerating.
Yeah, I think it comes down to cost. I think Pat Brown likes to say the Impossible Burger is the most expensive will ever be today. So, you have plant-based that's going this way, and you have animal proteins that are going that way. And hopefully governments step in and sort of tax the externalities that are created with animal proteins, right? And dairy, like methane, like it's a simple one is cows. Like if you started taxing the methane that cows belch out, any plant-based dairy alternative would just win, just based off of that one fact alone. So I think there's also that sort of implicit subsidies that they're getting that aren't really accounted for, and cost is actually going to be the big driver.
Oh. Okay, I guess we lost. Okay, I'm gonna move on to the next one. So I think you guys touched on a lot of the challenges, right? Whether it be the price points or whether it be consumer sentiments or where are you gonna locally produce or source each of the products. So outside of flavor, which has already come up, what do you think is like the biggest challenge to competing with the traditional food companies? Like just one big challenge.
Cost is the obvious one, which I think we've already talked about. I think in even flavor, I mean, we sort of sum everything up into flavor, but there's a lot of things that go into the experience of what we eat and what we define as flavor. So a lot of people include textural elements like, scent. I don't think a lot of us really appreciate how important scent is to what we're eating, especially in Asia. There's this concept of fragrance, the rice, the level of detail of discussion around different types of rice, which I struggle to pick up, and I consider myself pretty decent in terms of palate. But, you know, if you haven't grown up with that concept of fragrance and mouthfeel and everything, I mean, there's so many layers in terms of different products and different flavor things. So I think, you know, it's like I said, it's really about localizing and really understanding what you're trying to make and what that consumer experience is built around.
Yeah, I think another huge component too, like what you just touched on, is texture, and that is much harder. Flavors are, you know, it's difficult maybe to scale and source and identify them, but once you do, you have a set of compounds that you need to create in the right proportions, and you need to insert them into your product in a way that preserves them. But texture is very hard in the plant-based sector. The rheology of the liquid or the matter, structural integrity is a big issue in plant-based, finding ways to mimic the experience that gives you the same mouthfeel, bite, chewiness, things of that nature of meat and cheese and yogurt. Because in general, plant proteins are often smaller and less complex than a lot of these animal proteins that we're seeing. So if you are committed to staying within the plant kingdom, especially with ingredients that already exist, the innovation that is required is much more creative than if we were to just, you know, replicate that and insert it into a plant-based product. So that's a huge, huge challenge that needs a lot more dedication on the research side, I think, both in academia and in the entrepreneurial sector, to better understand how we can use novel techniques to mimic the rheology, structural integrity, and otherwise like texture, mouthfeel of these animal-based products, because no one's really come close to doing it yet.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Okay, so I guess kind of leads well into like in terms of like the lessons you've learned. Really, like all your companies have done pretty well to this point, or have been relatively successful. So can you please share with our audience one business or strategic lesson that you got from another company that you were able to adapt or kind of just take from other startups and make it your own?
I mean, I think our experience is that, you know, this industry is extremely supportive. So we've taken a lot of lessons from a lot of different people. I mean, I'm trying to sum one. I mean, there are a few, but I also think it's not just, I think it's so early, you know, I don't think we can define what we've done as a success yet. I think we have a long way to go before we do that. And we're still very much learning and understanding where our niche is. So I think it's very easy to get into sort of a groupthink mentality in this space, because it is still very small, even though it's growing fast. And, you know, it's still important that companies do branch out and differentiate and find what works, because I don't think we have a set model or a set answer. But I mean, we've certainly looked at, you know, the companies that have been very successful so far and are trying to emulate as much as possible based on, you know, what we like that they've done.
I come from a tech background, tech like software tech background, and in software tech you sort of like move quickly, break things, and you know, you launch and it's kind of fine if like you have to revert changes and go back to a previous version, and you know, that's all gravy there. And I think what the best quote I've heard, and I've sort of really taken to heart, is you're not in the food business, you're in the photocopying business, right? Like having repeatable good products that, because you're photocopying, sort of have a natural sort of cost curve downwards is really important. And you know, everything that we do, it's sort of a change of mindset of like move fast, break, like all the legal precedents, and move fast, but make sure like, you know, you run it through the co-packer for 4 or 5 times to make sure that like it's a repeatable, delicious product that, you know, has good texture. Like it's a different set of metrics that you're sort of optimizing for, and your mindset has to be like, it's a large portion of it's just an operations like challenge, right? And I think that part you don't really appreciate in food, like the fact that the current system exists the way it does. Yeah, there's a lot of flaws with it, the fact that we use animal proteins and all that stuff, but you know, and this is to your previous question, the incumbents have done a masterful job of like distribution, supply chain, like that stuff you look at and you're in awe of, right? Like the fact that you could get grape nuts anywhere for such a low cost at a highly delicious and nutritious sort of substance, you know, that is insane to me. Like 100 years ago, that wouldn't exist. Like we're truly in a blessed time, and we're just trying to take that next leap to just think about the moral and sustainable aspect of things.
Awesome. Okay, so we got maybe time for one more question. So I think a good one to harp on that we haven't really touched was, what's your ideal exit strategy? Does that mean like you're going to be acquired by like a large CPG that can bring your company to scale? And we talked about how you can partner with other companies, and like create other synergies, or do you see a value of being independent? What do you guys foresee for each of your companies?
We really see a value in being independent, because we're so premised on innovation. And I think like one sentiment I was going to say earlier to the previous question was, testing is extremely important, but we also have, it's totally fine, also have the ethos of starting early and iterating often, because you don't really know how consumers respond to something until you test it and you see the data in real time. You test it again and again and again, and you keep learning and you keep iterating. And so I think, there is the risk in acquisition of losing that ethos of innovation and sort of just scaling what currently exists and maintaining the status quo of the existing processes or products, versus the flexibility to continuously improve and to come up with new ideas. And so that's kind of what excites me about continuing to own this company and grow it over time, and follow that sort of path.
Yeah, I mean, same from our end. Like at this point, it's way too early to be really thinking about that. We're focused on innovation, building really great products, and understanding our consumers as well as possible. And if we execute reasonably well in all the things we say we want to do, then hopefully we will have options or be able to run a successful business down the line. So I do think, just speaking generally, I'm sure just the way this industry is shaping up, and with the amount of talent and capital and cool things happening, there will for sure be a lot of consolidation, acquisition, all sorts of things happening down the line. So I'm sure there will be those opportunities for any number of companies, but we have to stay focused and take things step by step.
Yeah, for us, it's our North Star is carbon emission reduction. So however we get there, that's fine by us. If we suck at operations and there's a bigger company who's like, hey, we could do this better than you, then so be it. We're trying to obviously build those core competencies internally, just because you can't bank on that, right? That's not a real strategy to say some big company will acquire us and they'll figure out operations. So, but to us, like, the planet is the most important thing. And if it is, because they are amazing at that, right? Like, and that's traditionally what they've become, is sort of the pharma model, where they don't invest in these smaller, like these new age technologies. They're not going to like go try different dairy things and say seeds are the best. They're just going to say, oh, they're doing a great job, let's buy them and scale them up, because we have the distribution channels, we have the supply chains, we have the marketing prowess. So for us, like, that's their model. And if it does lead to a multiple X difference in like how much emissions we could reduce, then that's great. But if we're obviously going to just try to do it ourselves, because that's not something that is top of mind. We're just trying to stay afloat every day, essentially, is what startup world is like. So
awesome.
Yeah.
All right, well, we are out of time, but I mean, this is a great learning experience for everyone. So thanks to the three of you. And I hope that all our audience members got a real chance to learn from the three of you. So thanks again. And hopefully you guys join in 2021.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.